Liz Vitalero, class of 97. Welcome to the 6th Kenyon Women Giving Back virtual event. We are so fortunate to have all of you with us for the opportunity to hear from Gretchen Baker, class of 97, Dorey Butter, class of 96, and Daisy Desrosiers for a discussion about museums and the power of being a generalist.
The person talking has their dog barking in the background.
I know, I apologize. Unfortunately, I have to be the one talking as well. I, along with the other ladies of the Kenyon Women Giving Back Steering Committee, hope this series will help build a deep connection with Kenyon women across the generations, because we are such a special group of people. We do amazing work and we have a lot to share. I would like to introduce our moderator for this evening. Daisy Desrosiers is the David and Francie Horvitz Family Foundation Director and Chief Curator at the GUND. Daisy joined the GUND as Director and Chief Curator in June of 2021 to reimagine the role of Kenyon's Arts Learning Museum and steer the institution's growth as it enters its second decade. She collaborates with faculty, students, and staff to offer programs and exhibitions that foster curiosity toward new ideas, people, and experiences while uplifting those left out of the canon. She's also responsible for managing care of the GUND's growing collection, which now includes over 200 pieces of contemporary art. Daisy earned a bachelor's degree in art history from the Université de Montréal and a master's degree in art history from the Université de Québec at Montreal. Her thesis work focused on the cultural, post-colonial, and material implications of the use of sugar in contemporary art. It goes without saying that Daisy is the perfect person to moderate this panel tonight. Daisy, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Liz. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes? Okay, great. It is my pleasure to serve as the moderator for our conversation tonight. I'm really excited to get to know our panelists and dive into questions. But first, a few logistics. So currently you're all on mute to enhance the audio quality of our conversation. We will be sure to save time to address your questions at the end of our session. You can ask questions in two ways. If you think of a question during our conversation, please send it to the submit question in the chat feature at any time throughout the discussion. You can also, at the end, you may use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen, and you will be on mute to ask your question. I would like to kick things off by introducing our panel, and we'll ask that each of our panelists tell us a little bit about themselves and about their path. First, we have Gretchen Baker, class of 1997. Gretchen is the director of the Carnegie Museum of Natural History. Gretchen, would you tell us a bit about you?
Good evening. I also have to correct you, Daisy. It's Carnegie.
I'm so sorry.
Yes.
Carnegie.
When you move to Pittsburgh, you find out that here it is the Carnegie Museum of Natural History. Apparently, at one point, Andrew wanted to return to his Scottish roots and pronunciation. So I have a little accent here in Pittsburgh. But yes, here at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History, where I have been the director since April 1st, 2021. So I'm just coming up on my 3rd anniversary. But I began my life in a small farm town about 500 miles directly west of Kenyon, a town called Macomb, Illinois. And when I went to Kenyon, I combined my interest in science and anthropology into a synoptic major, and spent my 4 years at Kenyon very happily, and then moved to Chicago after that. And I think we'll have a lot of time for me to talk about my museum journey. But after a little bit of some time in Chicago, worked in Los Angeles for a number of years, and then I'm now here in Pittsburgh. But really excited to talk about museums, even though I've been doing it all day. I just can't wait to talk to you more about it. Thanks for everyone for coming.
Oh, this is so great. Carnegie, duly noted. Next up, we have Dorey Butter. Dorey is a project manager at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History. Dorey, please tell us a bit about yourself.
Good evening. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really grateful for the Kenyon Women Giving Back group here to invite me and have the opportunity to speak about my experience working at museums. I do work at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. It's also a mouthful. And some people say NAMOC, that we just try to say it as fast as we can, just say African American History and Culture. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, and my parents were professors at the University of Dayton, and I eschewed that and decided that I wanted to leave home, and decided that Kenyon was far enough to be away from home, but close enough to get back if I needed to. So I went to Kenyon and graduated with, I think my major, this is something if you're going to ask later about advice not to do, don't change your major your third week of your senior year, because I did that. But my major was in international relations. I started out as an anthro major, and I had a minor in religion. When I left Kenyon, I worked for AmeriCorps for 2 years, and then got my master's in Mexico in anthropology and came back and started my job at the Smithsonian. I worked at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival for many years, starting from 2000 till 2010, and then got recruited to the National Museum of African American History and Culture before we even opened, because I think one of my colleagues at the museum saw me working really late at night at Folklife and was like, we need that person who's working late at night. We need industriousness. So that's how I got my start at the Smithsonian. And I've been a project manager since 2010 at the African American History and Culture Museum. Delighted to be here.
Dorey. Yeah, it's wonderful to have you with us. Well, let's start the conversation. You both started giving us insight into your journey. And I feel the first question to set the table is, how did your Kenyon education prepare you for the role that you have right now, and how does it impact your practice?
Do you want me to take it first?
There's no order. There's no order. Yes.
Okay. I'll start. So my experience at Kenyon, when I started out, I was really interested in archaeology. I came from a high school. I was really lucky in my senior year of high school. I had a teacher who was interested in local history in Dayton, and she knew a little bit about the archaeology of our town and knew that where my high school was right on top of a dairy farm. And so she looked out one summer and saw the outline of what was the homestead of the place where we were. And she got permission from the school board to start an archaeology class. So that's how I started. And I was so interested and keen on it that I went to Kenyon thinking I'm going to be an archaeologist. And then quickly was dispelled of that, not because it wasn't cool, because it was very cool, but I realized very quickly that I was more interested in learning about the people whose things, whatever we found belonged to, rather than, trying to hypothesize about why they use such and such tool or how they, where and how. I thought, well, I'd like to talk with people and find out why they use these things. So I switched to cultural anthropology, and then I and then I spent my junior year abroad in Africa, in Tanzania, because I was still interested in the sort of the roots of humanity. And so that's how I started in Africa. And one thing I really valued was when I went to school there, the classes that were open to us were, we could take whatever we wanted, but the other students who were in my school in University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, they were all on tracks. So if you were studying sociology, you were on the sociology track and took all sociology courses. And I appreciated that I could take any course that I was interested in. And that's sort of what I did at Kenyon too, and really allowed me to explore a lot of different interests. So I think that has also translated into the work that I do now, in that, I'm not really a specialist as a project manager. I'm a generalist. I work on all different kinds of projects, and it's helped me to be flexible in that way. So I'm really grateful for the experience that I had at Kenyon to sort of lead me on that path. Long answer, but.
When I talked about the small town where I grew up, about 12,000 people, and there was a small geology museum on campus, on the small university campus, and it was really just rocks on shelves, not inspiring for a career in museums. And it frankly never even occurred to me that people worked in museums because I had such limited exposure to that. I loved science and I loved people. My dad was a family physician, and I thought, well, you like science, you like people, you go into medicine, or you become a science teacher. And there really was no more exposure to me in where I grew up about other career journeys and pathways that I might pursue if I was interested in science and people. But I went to Kenyon and I was going to go pre-med, quickly dispelled of that. Thank goodness to organic chemistry, rooted me right out of that pathway. But what was great though at Kenyon while I was there, I was like, well, what is this culture anthropology class? What is this environmental economics class? What is the religious experience? What is, I mean, I just had never been exposed to all of these different subjects. And then certainly the way they all connect to each other, truly the humanities. And I'm appreciating your comment, Dorey, about not sure what your major was. If you asked any of my roommates, I mean, I had a different major every semester because I just wanted to keep studying it all. I just didn't want to specialize. And at some point, you know, you have to make a decision, you have to put something down. But I think that what I used to feel was maybe a bit of I just can't figure out what I want to do. I can't focus, I can't specialize. And that seemed like a bad thing. But now I think that is truly one of my strengths, being able to, I can go a little bit in a lot of different subject matters now here at the Natural History Museum. And natural history is inherently humanistic and integrated. How does the ancient earth affect life on earth? How does the atmosphere affect plants? You know, it's all so connected. And so I think it suited me really well, even though I didn't know that this was even a job. I totally fell into it by chance, getting a job at the Field Museum in Chicago after I graduated. And this whole world opened up to me that I had no idea. And I think that, so now I lead this life that actually I led at Kenyon, very much so. So it kind of set maybe that was a good thing to remain so curious and trying to seek out other disciplines and keep learning and keep trying to find those connections.
This is so powerful to hear. And, you know, the title for this conversation was so intriguing and inspiring to me, just again, because this term, being a generalist, what does that mean? And why is it so powerful? And you both touch on it, but can you reflect on an example or project where being a generalist has been, and why it's so important in this industry, in the museum industry, and what are some of the skills or even characteristics that now you can only identify with the strength of being a generalist, and even if this is a term that you use to define your practice in general?
That's a good question. I think part of it, I will take it as from the lens of being a project manager. I think when I first came to the Smithsonian, I didn't even know what a project manager was. I didn't know you could get a degree in it. I didn't know it was a thing. And actually that didn't happen until I came to my museum. But I think what being a generalist was, you know, apart from being able to, you know, Gretchen, I feel like you were singing my song. We had very similar paths of what we were interested in and how we studied. And I think it just allowed me to be able to connect to a lot of different people on a lot of different levels, whether it was your interest or your specialty in this or that. I think as a project manager, I have what I do in my job all the time is I work with people who are at the very top. I work with people who are worker bees, who help me get the things that I need to do done. As a project manager, I should back up a little bit. For our museums, I mostly work on exhibitions, which means that I work with a team of curators. Those are the folks who basically come up with the stories. If you go into an exhibition, they're the ones who come up with the stories, and they select the objects. So all of the things that you see in an exhibition. In addition to the curators, I work with the designers. So they take the vision of the curator and sort of put that to work to a space. So they know, okay, this is going into such and such gallery. I know that's only 4,200 square feet. So this is how I'm going to divide that space. I also work with the fabricators. Those are the people who then take those design drawings and then turn them into a construction document, which means that's how they build it in the space. And those are just some of the people who I work with. Also educators. I work with editors and writers and, you know, all different kinds of people. So it's sort of from the back end of things to the front end of things. I don't often get to talk about, you know, the kind of stuff I do on a daily basis because I'm just in it all the time. But I think that being a generalist sort of translate that same kind of thing of being able to go from thing to thing sort of translates to the way that I do my job, that I can, you know, access a lot of different kinds of positions and people and can switch different, you know, modes of getting stuff done too.
Yeah, and it seems like seeing an idea from the very first step to its full inception, right? To its full manifestation in the
Yes,
space.
which is it's awesome. It's awesome to go from a little conception. And to me, there's always the start when you're at the beginning of an exhibition. You know what the title is, you know what the theme is, but you just, I am not a necessarily a visual person, so I can't necessarily see how this is going to translate into the gallery. And then I see what my colleagues, the designers, can do, and I'm just wowed every time. And I just think it's so cool. And then I get to learn something new about a different you know, historical period, or when I worked at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, it was a different country or a state or profession, and then move along. So it's very cool.
Yeah.
I think of Dorey as, you know, she's like the spoke of a wheel, like all these specialists that are around the table. And, you know, an exhibition is one of the most group worthy tasks that exist. I mean, you absolutely have to have all these specialists to do the work, right? But I mean, if they could just do their own thing, it would be chaos, right? And she's like pulling all that together. I think, and I worked in exhibitions for a long time, so I relate to that. And I think now in my role, what some things that I find myself doing that make me feel like I'm really leaning into that generalist tendencies or strength is a strategic planning exercise that we went through over the course of a year, you know, and it was hours of facilitating conversations with, for me, new staff who didn't, you know, had just arrived fresh off the plane, one-way ticket, fully masked in the middle of the pandemic, and we're going to start figuring out where we're going, right? And but spending time with the scientists who are the specialists, they're the ones who I'm going to study that one genus of plant on that one foothill of the Andes for the rest of my life. I'm like, that's amazing. I can't do that, but that's amazing. And I want to be close to that and pull that out, right? And being able to make all those people feel that you're interested in what they have to offer. And genuinely, I do. You know, I just like such a cool thing to be around that. And then in the same moment, being able to turn that story of who we are as a museum into messages for donors, for the public, you know, and I think as a generalist, being able to have that awareness about all these stakeholders and what they all might be needing in the moment, and being able to bridge that is, I think it's really exciting and really exhausting, actually. But I like reflecting back on my day or my week or my year and just thinking, wow, so much variety. And I think that I would get bored if it was anything other than that.
I relate to that. I think one of the gift of museum and maybe being a generalist is that you are exhausted, but you're led by curiosity, and you lead with curiosity. And that's the gift of this work. When I think about our museum on campus, I'm trained as an art historian, but I interact with all departments on Kenyon campus, talk about thinking about everyone, making sure you can translate, you can connect, you can adapt some of the knowledge or information that the exhibition are conveying, objects in our collection, so that it can be decipher for different departments to be able to teach and learn from objects in our collection. And so I've been reflecting on that term myself a lot lately, and specifically in this role. In thinking about museum and the museum industry, which very often feels very obscure to people visiting museum. They come as viewer, but they don't know anything or don't have access to the behind the scenes. And I'm wondering, because we have you two as expert into quite an extraordinary institution, what surprised you the most about the museum industry today? And it could also be what has surprised you as you've evolved in that industry.
Well, like I said, I had no idea that people worked in museums. I think when I went to museums growing up, I don't know, you added water or something, and then there were the dioramas. It didn't even occur to me that there were people who made these things. So I think I was just surprised by the entire world of it, that I got there. And I literally, at the Field Museum in Chicago, opened the door on the 3rd floor, and there were 300 scientists, 35 million specimens and objects, libraries, labs. It was just like Wonka, It's like, well, you gotta be kidding me, this is behind here. So I was surprised by that. I think, to the second part of your question, and I know we'll get to some of this later in the conversation, but I think about what a natural history museum concerned itself with when I first started in the field in 1997, and the kinds of topics and issues that we spend a lot of time concerning ourselves with today. And it's very different. And I don't think that's just because I was a curatorial assistant in the botany collection and now I'm a director. I think that the field, we're social institutions. And much like Kenyon, is evolving to, keep up with the questions and the crises and the needs of communities. And no longer are museums, and again, at least a field museum, literally a marble block tower out on a piece of land,
Right.
far from the city, just this, compared to how we're trying to engage with communities today as living institutions. So I think that's kind of, for me, how much it's changed.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You made me think of two things. So the first thing that surprised me, I guess, coming to the museum world is, well, first of all, I was coming from AmeriCorps, where I was a direct service provider. I remember coming home from Kenyon spring, maybe it was Thanksgiving break, and I remember hearing Bill Clinton, 1986, talking about a way that you can give back to your country, and it didn't have to be military service. And so I worked in the county jail in my hometown, and I taught literacy, and I thought this was the coolest thing. I was just going to be a direct service provider, be in the nonprofit world. And it was actually through a Kenyon colleague, Kenyon classmate, how I even found out about the museum world, and how I got to the Smithsonian was because I did a week-long externship at the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. And the person who's the archivist there, he worked with Smithsonian Folkways, which is Smithsonian's record label. And I just thought it was the coolest thing because I left and I had 8 million CDs. And I thought that was really cool because he gave me all this loot, and then taught me about the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, which is something that they still to this day put on every year on the National Mall. And they teach people, they bring people in from different countries or states or professions to do whatever it is they do in their normal life on the National Mall. So, I mean, we did do one actually on the Smithsonian, and it was all the different Smithsonian departments and colleagues came out and they talked about what they do in their regular jobs. I did programs on NASA. We had astronauts and people who work in the food lab and all this kind of stuff. So I just thought that was the coolest thing. And I thought AmeriCorps was the coolest thing. And then I learned about the festival and I was like, no, that's the coolest thing. And so I just had to kind of reconcile with my personal I guess desires or wants to feel like I needed to be providing direct service, but part of that was education. And I reconciled that with knowing that what I'm doing at the Smithsonian is also a different kind of giving back. It's education, but it's through a different lens. And the thing that surprised me, I just from going from the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, which is very organic. It's out on the National Mall. You're under tents. You get basically, you have these,
That was a different.
10 by 10 tents, and people set up tables. And if it doesn't work for them, I say, okay, well, what do you want to change tomorrow? And we can move this around and we can hang this differently. And then I went to the actual museum, and the first time I went to an exhibition, and it took them 4 hours to fill one case. And I thought, you've got to be kidding me. Like, it's so slow. And so part of that is just the process. That's just how long it takes to do something, because you only get one chance to get it right. I mean, not really, but usually just, you know, for time's sake, you can put something in, you hang it, and then you close the case, and that's it, because it has to be a sealed environment, all of that. It took forever. And I thought, you've got to be, this is just ridiculous. Why does it take so long? And then on top of that, being a part of the government, it's a federal entity. So everything contractually takes a gazillion years to do anything. Like when our Office of Contracting tells me it's going to take 3 months to look at a tiny contract, I just want to, you know, cut my eyeballs. So those things surprise me. But what Gretchen said about the museum, just museum industry in general, I had no idea how things got put together, how things got into a museum. And so learning that was really surprising. And actually being at our museum where I am right now, we didn't have a collection when we started, when the legislation was signed. So learning about how a museum can build a collection if you don't already have one extant. And that was through connections with people, through auctions, through donations, all different kinds of things. So that was really surprising to me. I just had no idea. And then I just loved the idea of being able to tell people stories through objects. And I just think that's the coolest thing, which is what we do every day, all the time.
This is so inspiring. I have so many follow-up questions for the two of you after
Good.
this conversation. This
Great.
is fascinating. I want to shift a little bit direction, and given that we're all women working in the museum field, I'm wondering if you can reflect with us on how does gender play a role within the museum world, and what does it mean for you, and what has been changing or what you hope will change? I know it's a big question.
Want to start with that one, Gretchen?
Sure. Yeah, Daisy, when we were preparing for this call a little bit, we were remarking on some of the differences between art museums and the field of art, and the field of natural history and science. And I guess, Dorey, we didn't talk as much about kind of history museums, but at least within natural history museums, which are scientific institutions, it has mostly, almost entirely been led by men, historically, the museums. And so certainly when I was growing up, like in the field, there were very few institutions that were led by women. And now that's definitely changing. But you're seeing it, it's still like primarily museums are women. They're most of my staff are women. And then we have families. And when I had my daughter, my husband decided to stay home with her full time so that I could continue working in a museum and traveling and going to donor events and going to the kinds of things that would set me up to be a museum director. My other colleagues who had children and were making, $35,000 a year in Chicago often would opt to stay home with their children because there's no way that salary would even cover the cost of childcare. And so we get this gap, many women in the staff, and then we get to upper management, and it's still, it's changing for sure, but it's still predominantly men, and predominantly directors with PhD. So there's also within science museums, you're a leader if you have a PhD and you're a specialist, right? I don't have a PhD. And I'm the first woman to lead the Carnegie Museum of Natural History in 125 years. but it took so much, like it took my husband, and he's a great stay-at-home dad, but there was no way that I could continue pushing ahead and putting in the time and putting in the miles on planes and putting myself in front of donors and making that connection to be even thought of for this role if it weren't for him. So it's changing, but it's still just it's an industry where, if you have privilege coming into it, which I didn't have loans. There were a number of things that I was like, I can keep just working at this. And I managed to also have a partner who was willing to take his own professional sacrifice for this. But it's changing, but certainly still the pay structure is so low for so long that I think we lose a lot of really great men and women, in the field who choose to support families and focus on.
I lost it when Ava said.
Thank you, Gretchen. Thank you so much for sharing. Dorey, do you have any thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, yes to everything that Gretchen said, and I've experienced that too, but I've also been really fortunate in that same in my museum, many of the upper management, or actually many of the people are women. And I was really fortunate when I started at Smithsonian. The director of the Smithsonian Folklife Festival was a woman who didn't have her PhD. All of the other curators who worked at the festival did actually have their PhDs, but the festival director didn't. So, and then when I got pulled to the African American Museum, my supervisor was a woman and she didn't have a PhD, and she was powerful. And so, and my mentor, the woman who first recruited me, also was a woman. So I feel like I was really fortunate that I had these really strong powerhouse women who really mentored me. And I didn't really even think that, oh, I couldn't do this because I'm a woman. And I appreciate very much having, a balanced staff where the Office of Project Management has I was thinking about this as we were talking. I think we're about half because just, I guess part of it's the nature of what we do in the Office of Project Management and Planning where I work. But, to have those female role models in the higher positions, I think really helps to bring in new, younger people, because they are thinking about those kinds of issues of like, how do we bring new people into the field? I'm also really fortunate because I work at a predominantly African American museum. And so issues of race and gender and identity play strongly in everything that we do. So I have colleagues who are really mindful of all of that. And so that's really a really great place to be, in terms of having that benefit of being around a lot of different people and being able to bring in and being cognizant of the fact that there are a lot of other voices out there to bring in.
It's such an interesting point, and I'm sure to your argument, or to your point, Dorey, the nature of the mission of your institution, I'm sure, has shaped a new generation and a growing generation of museum professional, because then again, you have new consideration, as you mentioned, to put in the work every day. It's not just for one project, not following one artist, but it's in everything you do. It's true, when we were preparing for this talk, I was also reflecting on the art world or visual art museum. And I have to say, and you pointed to it, Dorey, the role of mentorship and how that exists between women and professional, and between men and women as well, and how beneficial that can be. I can say that certainly while major institutions are led by men, when I think about MoMA, when I think about the Met and the large institution, but one of the things that struck me so much when I was appointed in this role is my first time attending a Association of Art Museum Director, and how all the women came to me. And you get this role, you get this position, you get into leadership, and nobody really tell you how lonely it's going to be. But in these moments when you meet, and they're all women I admired, but I was just so moved that we were at this moment in time where what they had to fight for was still a battle, but there were more of us to the forefront, and the way they were welcoming us, a new generation of emerging museum director, were being welcomed, given tricks, being looped into conversation that one could only imagine a few years ago, and now you're in it. So that support has meant so much. And as been such an integral part of how I think about mentorship here at the Gun and what we can do on this campus and thinking in similar terms.
I don't want to take away from that point, but it's also something that we're really mindful of as we design our exhibitions. And we're really cognizant of the fact that we need to bring in female voices. So we're always looking for ways to bring in women into our stories and use objects that help talk about that. An exhibition I'm working on right now is about the ripple effects of slavery. It's called In Slavery's Wake. And we have these 9 case studies, and several of them are about women and women's experience. And it's just been really important for us as we develop our exhibitions to bring in women voices and women experiences. So not just in the collegial environment, which is also very important, but also in the stories that we're telling to our visitorship, so that they see the role of women.
Yeah, thank you, Dorey. We're talking about change. We're talking about growth in museum and museum culture. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about how technology has informed museum as space of learning, of convening, of sharing. I think about internet as, having internet access and how that has shaped and transformed our exhibition, but also today thinking about technology such as AI, and if this is something that you've wrestled with. Is it integrated in the way you think about your program, or how does it inform the way you conceive of the future of the museums that you've both worked in and for?
AI hasn't hit my department just yet, but I was just listening to the secretary of the Smithsonian, Lonnie Bunch, who was the founding director of my museum. I was looking back at, he was on C-SPAN and, did a congressional hearing recently, and he was talking about how he would like the museum industry, at least Smithsonian, to embrace AI for good in ways that can be beneficial to people. I know, during the pandemic, of course, many things we had to sort of switch to virtual experiences, and we don't have a ton of, it's not so easy to create an exhibition and then just put it online. There's so many different levels to make that happen. And so the role of technology is really important, and we think about it all the time, but it's also something that's also really hard to integrate. So like when we're designing exhibitions and we want to have a QR code in there to tell more information, when we do our actual surveys, like look at the ends of the exhibition, when we look and see how people used it, people just aren't really using it. And so people are coming in to see the objects, which is, of course, our goal. We want people to be looking at the objects and using the objects. Another way that we use the internet is partially because we know that not everybody has the opportunity to come to Washington, D.C. and come to the National Mall and visit all the Smithsonians. So we use it as a way to bring our exhibitions to people around the world. One thing that the Smithsonian does, I'm sorry.
I just said this question of access. Yes.
Oh yeah, the question of access. So I mean, that's really big too. That's one of our director's mandates when he first started, when Lonnie Bunch first started, was, I know not everybody can come to this museum, and what can we do to bring it out to the world? And so we're starting to do more traveling exhibitions, and it's sort of the role of what the Smithsonian affiliates does. There are thousands of museums across the nation that are Smithsonian affiliates, and basically it's a way that other museums can get Smithsonian collections featured, and can sometimes increase, I don't want to say the cachet, but the visitorship that comes to their museums because they have Smithsonian objects there, or it's helping them highlight whatever their own exhibitions are, or their collections rather. So it's just a way, getting the museum out there. Doesn't always have to be technology. Part of it is this analog with traveling exhibitions and getting our collections and objects out to other places.
I think that I agree with all of that. And when I think about, well, most of you, I would imagine, like if you go to a museum, maybe you're going to learn something about dinosaurs. Maybe you're going because you just want like an hour by yourself. But most people go to museums to have a social experience with someone they care about. It's not that the content's not motivating it, but it really is a social experience. Yet when you go to museums or you think about this thing, the bias is that we're designing for a principal user, one person. And that happens in museums too. It's like, oh, go up to the touch screen, touch the screen, blah, blah, blah. And it's not the technology is not there supporting your desire to have a social experience. It's actually undermining it. And it's not to criticize a lot of the exhibits that we have here at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History. That was just a moment in time. Okay, screen, touch screen. Yeah, touch screen. Then we could put more content on there about the dinosaur. Let's do that. Okay. And I think what we need to figure out now is, because we have much more of the technology available to us and it's a lot more affordable, museums are not going to be early adopters in technology. We do not have the budget to be like, yeah, let's try this VR thing. Oh, let's try AR. Let's try AI. I mean, we're not even paying our people well enough, So we're not going to be the early adopters in the technology, but we do need to figure out ways to use technology that actually support visitors' desires to be together and to connect them in space. And I think there's some good examples of that happening now. But the other thing I would say is that before COVID, I spent so much time talking to people about digital in museums, right? And we were just like, digital, get it in there, get it in there, get it in there. And then COVID happened. And now it's like, oh God, I don't want another screen. I just want to go to the museum and look at something 3D. I want to put my arm around someone. I just want to go to the cafe and have a coffee. And I mean, I'm exaggerating, but people are not asking for it. They're not looking around like, where's all the digital technology? Because it's so everywhere in their life. It's almost like coming to a museum is like an antidote to that. It doesn't mean that we need to be using technology, because there's so much good there in terms of immersion and content and all of that. So we don't want to lose that. And there's a role for that, but it's interesting. It's like COVID kind of pulled back the brakes a little bit, and in a good way of checking ourselves on like, why would we actually use this? How can it serve the motivations of the visitors in coming here? How is it something that we can sustain as a museum, right? So it doesn't feel, it's not broken or outdated next week, right?
Yeah, you're right. A sustained approach to the integration of technology. I want to be mindful of time. I'm wondering if we have questions from the audience. I have so many questions, but I want to make sure we're generous of sharing the platform. Annie, is there anything?
We do have a couple of questions. So Ethan Snyder, class of 19, said that he'd love to hear from the panelists' opinion on the issue of taking any opportunity in the museum field that comes your way versus navigating ways of asking for compensation for labor. In his opinion, and in his experience, there's a big divide between these two camps, and he'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
So can you read just the part, is it taking any opportunity or?
I believe so, but if Ethan's still here, he's also welcome to unmute and ask the question. Ethan, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm still with you. So yeah, it's about taking, volunteer or unpaid opportunities that might be good for professional development, or kind of padding a CV, or starting to get into a specialty or an area in museum work that you haven't been, or you haven't had the opportunity to, whether it's in your current position or something like that, versus asking for compensation, which is, I think, starting to gain ground, but is not any less difficult than it was in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's good is that, at least here at Carnegie, there's no such thing anymore as an unpaid internship, which was not the case when I was growing up. Right. And so then again, it's those who are privileged that can afford to do an unpaid internship, right, to build the resume. So that's one thing. I do, I think that if there's an opportunity to do some volunteer work within a museum, it's on the museum side, at least on the Natural History Museum side, we have over 200 volunteers here at the Natural History Museum that do absolutely mission critical work. Like, we could not exist if we did not have our volunteers working in the collections and working in the galleries. So it is genuinely needed. And it's sort of like whatever time you can get, you know, and I think when you do have more specific experience related to like collections or something specific, that does help, you know, with your resume. But yeah, I think if it's any kind of work that's like a regular scheduled work, you should be compensated for it, you know. So, and I think it's okay to ask for that. I never asked for anything when I was young. It's just no one told me. Just Gretchen, just because you love it doesn't mean that you can't ask for more than what you deserve. And I'm pretty sure others were asking, and I just wasn't very good at that. So I think all of us need to be better at asking. We just need someone to kind of coach us in that. But looks like Sue has a question, but I don't want to take over from the moderator.
Dorey, do you have,
see a hand up.
any
Oh,
other
just,
questions?
I echo that too, and also Smithsonian, at least at our museum, and I think I think maybe 90% of the different internships, and there are a lot of different internships, are also paid, and that's new as well. Asking about like just getting your foot in the door, it really depends on the position. Like I had a colleague who I used to work with at Folklife who reached out to me because there was a position available, and I actually advised him not to do it. One was because I knew the nature of the work and I knew it wasn't fit to his abilities, but two, it just wasn't at a pay level that I thought was something that, you know, he could move up from there. And part of that's being in the federal government, and you can only go in certain positions, you can only go so high. And so it just, to me, didn't seem to make sense. I know that he was interested in working at our museum, but to me, I was like, there's other ways to do it. You know, one, there's this other opportunity in a different department that I recommend you apply for, but also, as Gretchen was saying, like having those conversations, seeing if you can do volunteer opportunities and sort of getting your foot in the door and learning other things sometimes is better than just getting your foot in the door because it's to be at whatever institution. It's not always the best end game, I don't think.
Thank you.
Feel free to reach out too if you want to brainstorm, if you have specific ideas of places or positions, but yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that, Ethan, there's a resource I'd be happy to share with you, which is museum-based, and it's about, you know, regulating opportunity for professional development. So I'll share more.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. Sue, I see that you have your hand up. Yes. Hi.
Need to unmute there. So I am curious. I'm very much a generalist and have kind of had my fingers in different pies throughout my life. And I'm heading into a job search right now. And I'm wondering if you have advice on how to represent yourself as a generalist without coming across as unfocused, either in your previous experience or in what you can offer to, you know, the employer. So any ways to focus that?
Well, I had a job interview a number of years ago, and I had to submit like my resume and blah, blah, blah. So I did that, got invited to the interview, and they said, is there anything else you'd like to share with us? Any of the materials before the interview? And I was like, well, I already gave you my resume and my cover letter, but I'm like, this is a test. Okay, what am I trying to do? And I started thinking about my story. Like, what is your story? What is your career story? You know, and I started looking back, you know, what felt meandering to me started to actually make a lot of sense about why I took this position, what I learned out of X position, and what that led me to Y position. What gaps was I trying to fill as I was going along? And I don't know that I would have been able to write that out if I had started from the beginning, but in looking back, it's just started to make sense. And so I don't know, and maybe that's the moment I started being like, oh, this is adding up. This actually, like, this makes sense. And it wasn't so much about being unfocused, but about, for me, it was a lot of, you know, filling my gaps, minding the gaps. Where was I trying to fill in? Working for people I really admired, you know, even if I was like, I'm not so sure about the job, but man, I'm going to learn. So it started, you know, I was telling my story of who I am. And it was just kind of like a little bit of a graphics exercise, but I put it together and I presented it to the committee about, so why was this job then that filling in that next block in my story.
Right. Nice. Thank you.
And it helped me kind of make sense of what had often felt like, oh, Gretchen interested in this, Gretchen interested in that, you know, I was like,
Right.
right. So that would be, and you could do it with a friend, you know, do it with someone you really trust about, okay, this is what I would think was going on here, and just see what it kind of adds up to. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Nice. Thank you.
Part of it is also knowing a little bit about what the job is asking, and then you taking, because I'm sure in some way you can always, we do this with objects. There's always a way to tell the story a different way, you know? And so whatever they're asking for in the job description, like how does your experience relate to that? You know, I'm not a hiring manager, but I would say, like, for me, looking at people's many very different things, like, because I too, like Gretchen, came from, you know, I worked in the county jail as a literacy provider, and now I'm a project manager. But to me, it seemed like a very meandering path, but to me, it all made sense. They were all stepping stones that led me to where I am now. And so figuring out how that story can tie into your resume, I think, is really important.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue, for your question. Before we close for tonight, I'd like to turn things back to Liz to conclude our event this evening.
Thank you, Daisy. This was a super interesting evening. This was a very interesting topic to me. I cannot thank Daisy, Gretchen, and Dorey enough for this engaging and enlightening conversation. On behalf of myself and the Kenyon Women Giving Back Steering Committee, we want to thank you for joining us tonight. Our event series will continue with an in-person event at reunion weekend. And this is just a reminder that all alumni are invited back to the Hill this year, and every year but this year especially because of the bicentennial reunion. Kenyon women have played a critical role in our beloved alma mater, and we will continue to make a significant impact on its future. The mission of Kenyon Women Giving Back is to celebrate and amplify our impact on the college and on the world, both by building the connections like we do through events like this and through philanthropic support. Our gifts to the Kenyon Fund provide much needed support for all of the things that we love about Kenyon. The Kenyon Women Giving Back Steering Committee encourages each of you to consider a gift to the Kenyon Women's Annual Scholarship Fund, which will make an impact on female identifying students today and in the future. No matter how you choose to support Kenyon, your gift can directly enhance the educational experience of Kenyon students who are following in your footsteps. You can visit gift.kenyon.edu to make your gift, or you can use the QR code that I believe will be shown at the end of this. And then finally, we would love your feedback on this event, suggestions for future event topics. That in particular would be super great. If you have a particular alumna that you think would be a great person for a panel such as this, we'd love to hear your ideas. And we will continue to engage Kenyon women with these events. You can also send your ideas directly to Andy Gordon at gordon3@kenyon.edu. And we just want to thank you again and have you all have a great night.
Liz, we have a few more questions actually. If Gretchen and Dorey are willing to stick around, I will ask those questions. And I know, Ellen, I think you had a question if you'd like to ask your question. Oh, Ellen, I think you have to unmute.
I do. I have to unmute. Actually, I was just going to respond to Sue, but I just wrote to her. The way I'm a lifelong museum educator, exhibit designer, generalist, who was an art history and Spanish major and made my way to museums through exhibit, working in a art gallery, and realized that the profit side of art wasn't for me. So I made it to Bank Street, which at the time was a co-program with Kenyon, which I didn't do, but I then went a year later and got my degree in museum education and leadership. But so I've been a exhibit designer for a gazillion years and focus on the interpretation side of things. But Sue, what I was going to say to you is I always market myself as a utility player. So when I'm going in to talk to people, I'm like, I can do so many things. I've done them all before. Put me in where you need me, coach. I have experience and expertise in all of them. So make use of me however you can. And that seemed to be something that works well with a lot of clients.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's a great phrase too.
We have another question from Shirley Chung, class of 91. She asked, can you tell us a little bit about what community engagement looks like today versus 10 to 15 years ago? And in what ways are your museums looking to engage more deeply? What does that look like for your exhibits and your marketing and in your fundraising?
Oof.
Dorey, your DNA is this.
It is our DNA, yes.
Like, this is not my DNA. So I'm trying to like genetically engineer, re-engineer, but you go first, because I think it's, you embody that.
We do, and we do it in so many different ways. And part of it is if you just go to our website, nmahc.si.edu, you see like the myriad events that we have going on all the time. We have things from, they have these conversations called a seat at the table, and they always engage different people, whether it's through religion or through LGBTQ, through gender, through race, conversations. And so it's literally having dinner at a table with people that you don't necessarily know, and you have these conversations. There'll be a moderator who will start or who will talk about a specific topic, and then you have the opportunity to talk with your fellow table employees or table guests to talk about this. We do it all the time through panels, through the exhibitions that we do. You know, our mission in general, especially the exhibition I'm working on right now, is to sort of tell these stories of people from their perspective and to get people's stories out to people who wouldn't necessarily see them or hear them in their hometown. So we give people the opportunity and the space to talk about issues like race that they may not be able to talk about. When Gretchen was talking about people engaging with each other, I think that to me is one of the most meaningful things when I go into the galleries and I see people connecting over things like a sugar bowl and talking about that. Daisy, it made me think of you when she said that in the beginning. We have this giant cauldron of sugar, and you're talking about that in relation to the slave trade. And you know, you have visitors talking to other visitors just about things that they're seeing. And so part of that is getting people engaged and interested and talking and taking these things back to their hometown. So we do it all the time, and everything, it is in our DNA. Everything that we do is getting people to talk about issues that are not necessarily the most comfortable, but they are all about truth. You know, I think all of our exhibitions are based on scholarship. And so starting from that foundation, we build up from there and try to take that also to, I just was thinking about the fundraising question. This past August, we had a hip hop block party because hip hop celebrated the 50th anniversary. And one of the funders who they were able to snag was AARP. And I was like, that is stinking brilliant, you know, as a 50 years on, and they had AARP, and I was like, that's amazing. So it's looking at and engaging funders in different ways. You know, we're working on traveling exhibitions. So can we engage in you know, a shipping company, stuff like that aren't your typical foundations or, you know, other philanthropists. So there's a lot of different ways that we do it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, these 19th century natural history museums funded and founded by white industrialists didn't come out of, there wasn't a lot of community engagement in building those collections necessarily, right? And so a lot of the work that we're doing, certainly on the exhibitions and some of what Dorey is talking about, but I mean, there's so much work to be done, even to, you know, start to open up the collections, to seed authority, to recognize that just because we have 125 years of primarily men with PhDs defining what is fact, defining what is science, defining the stories we share, and then starting to say, oh, maybe we don't have all the knowledge, maybe we don't have all the expertise. Let's open this up a little bit. That's a completely different way of operating as a museum. And it's super exciting. And for us right now, primarily this is focused on our anthropology collections and the human remains in our care. And a lot of the work that the Native American Graves Repatriation Act and recent updates to the NAGPRA regulations that is putting a lot more burden on museums. And here at the Carnegie, we were doing all of that and more even before those regulations came out. So we weren't in a situation where we were having to like react, but there's so much work to do there on the decolonizing of the collections and the decolonizing of the museums. And so I think that, you know, one of the points I was talking about at the beginning of the meeting or the beginning of the talk, which is just, you know, that it wasn't such a public conversation at the time that I started at the museum. Even though there were certain people working on it, it was a very much, this is happening over here in this corner over here, and we don't really talk about that, you know. And so I like that we're talking about it. It's pretty scary as a museum director because it feels like I'm just gonna mess up. Like I'm definitely gonna say something, I'm gonna make a mistake here. And it's just like the scrutiny is intense, you know, and it's really just about being humble and recognizing that we don't have all the knowledge and we're, you know, just opening ourselves up to that. And that's, so that kind of community engagement, I guess it's a humility and a ceding of power that museums like the Carnegie have had for so long. Power of race, power of gender, power of class, power of control over resources. So I'm going to take all your plants and I'm going to take all your artifacts and I'm going to bring them back to my, you know, so it's a lot to kind of not necessarily unwind, but just try to shift in how we engage with communities, starting with the collections.
I mean, I know we're at time. I think I would be remiss if I didn't share with this group that has known Kenyon for so long. One of the ways in which with our emerging museum, we're 12 years old. So we're one of Kenyon's, we're much younger than the Kenyon Review, but one of the ways in which we've been thinking about community engagement. At the center of our work are the students and the artists, students and artists learning together from each other. One of the new initiative, and to Gretchen's point, being terrified as a new leader, and that was the first project that I led coming in, was in seeing in Mount Vernon these storefront that had been restored, but that remained empty. And so the museum took on a lease in one of the space. And the whole goal of this space is how do we build partnership? How do we build relationship? How do we become better neighbor? So we have this audience that's already on campus, but we're also part of the Knox County community. We're also part of Ohio. Like, who do we not know that we could be talking to? And how could we do a better job at sharing what we have? Because everything here at the Gund is free. You can come to the museum with as many family members as you can, but if you don't know where to find us, who's there, what is this about? And so those are big questions. They're difficult questions to answer. They were certainly complicated for me as a newcomer, not knowing Ohio very well, but it's been extraordinary in the development of this project. I think what I was surprised by was how many people would say, yes, we want to partner up with you. And now we have this kind of satellite space that is offering free workshop, free art program for anyone that shows up. The only thing we ask is that people show up with respect and curiosity. And so we have like senior citizens during watercolor every week. They visit the museum inspired by what we have. They meet at the annex. And so it's become a gathering space as well. We have some of our students worker who are hosting and supporting, you know, activities at the annex. So it also becomes an opportunity for Kenyan students to learn beyond the walls of the museum. And what we've discovered is the incredible appetite for a creative life, for creative conversation within our community. And so that is still unfolding. It's quite new, but as you return to campus, I just wanted to extend an invitation to stop by as we're kind of developing and thinking through this initiative and what we will learn and what we will be able to become as a result of that beautiful new experiment. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that and turn it over to Annie. It's been so wonderful to be part of this conversation.
Well, thank you all for sticking past time. We're at 8:05. I know we didn't get to all the questions. I think that we could continue on in this subject for a very long time, but I want to thank Gretchen and Dorey and Daisy for taking us along on this journey and this conversation. Really quickly, I'll just bring up the QR code for anyone who is interested in giving to the Women's Annual Scholarship Fund. And for those of you that are in the class of 74 who are wanting to stick around for your social event, please stick in the room and we will move you over to your breakout room. But thank you everyone for the lovely evening. Enjoy.
So much. And come to DC. Visit the Smithsonian.
Thanks, everybody.